Welcome back to the Stronger by Science podcast. I'm Greg Knuckles.
I'm Pac.
And I'm Milo.
And we have another, what I assume will be a great episode for you guys today. The reason I say I assume is when we're coming in and we're doing kind of the standard Stronger by Science podcast formula, I'm very confident that it's going to be good stuff. And this time, I think it will be, but I have a bit less confidence and a bit more trepidation, I'll admit that up top, because we are trying something new in this episode. What we're going to do this time around is we're going to have some mini debates about topics that you will frequently hear discussed in the gym, see discussed on social media, things that people just really get at each other's throats about. And we're doing kind of the policy debate thing where one of us is going to be arguing for each one of these topics. One of us is going to be arguing against, and one person is going to be the moderator. A twist is that we don't know which position we're taking until the topic is introduced. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, it should be fun. It should be fun, but it is a deviation from the standard formula. So I'm excited to give it a shot. And if you really, really like this format for an episode, or if you really, really dislike it, let us know either in the comments of the YouTube video where this is posted, or if you're listening on podcast feeds, head over to the Stronger by Science Facebook group or subreddit and leave your feedback there. To be entirely clear, this is not going to become like the standard exclusive formula for podcast episodes. But sometimes we do listener Q&A episodes. Sometimes we do fireside chats. Like we have a menagerie of shapes that episodes can take. So we're just feeling out if this is another formula that we might, add to our cookbook for how episodes might look. So if you really like it or really don't like it, let us know. So quick question for both of you, just at the top of this episode. Would you say that you like debates, like arguing? Like is it something that you just enjoy doing, or are you more kind of like conflict averse on that in that regard?
So I'll start by saying that I'm a recovering comments on Facebook debater, as in like back in the day I'd be part of some closed groups, mostly focused on lifting and nutrition and strength training and stuff, and I would really enjoy spending a lot of time arguing with people that would never accept my stance, regardless of how much evidence I had to present. But I always found it entertaining for myself having to craft an argument and present sources and try to make a compelling case for something that I truly believed was true. And on the other side, aside from being a recovering debater online, because I've stopped doing that as I realized it was mostly a waste of time. Besides, the fun part of it, I do enjoy debating stuff with Milo when it comes to anything sports science related. With the odd hot topic debate where either his or my stance will be a bit more controversial than some of the sort of established truths that we have all come to accept. I think those make for nice exercises, and they often allow you to see a side of an argument that you wouldn't have otherwise seen, because everybody accepts that X is better than Y. But when Milo comes in with his hot take, I'm like, okay, sure, I get that this is a hot take, but interesting how you presented it here, and cool. I hadn't thought of that because I didn't bother looking at what the other side had to argue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I broadly mirror Pac, I'd say. I'm of two minds on the matter. On the one hand, I'm a bit of a consequentialist when it comes to having arguments or debates in the first place, where unless I sort of deem the other party involved as being willing to change their mind or their stance as a result of like discourse. Usually I won't debate or argue. I'll kind of just put my stance out there, and I might read about other stances, but that is about it. I'm not necessarily too interested in a back and forth unless I have good information that, hey, this party is willing to change their mind. But then when it comes to actually arguing itself, just forget the consequences for a moment. I do enjoy forming the arguments and trying to put them in the most coherent way possible. And specifically, even in my own head, I like playing devil's advocate with myself a little bit, just because sometimes, especially when there is some evidence in favor of one stance versus another, it can be very tempting to adopt a very absolute stance. And I think just checking yourself a little bit by devil's advocating yourself can be a good way to arrive at a more nuanced place ultimately. But I would say generally I do avoid arguments unless I think there's something to be gained at the end of it. Yeah, what about you, Greg?
I think I think I'm kind of similar to you guys. I used to engage in arguments on social media quite a bit more back in the day, particularly Facebook. Like I'm going to date myself a little bit here, but Facebook back in the day used to be, I think, pretty good for having either fruitful debates and discussions or just like knockdown, drag out fights where you were trying to make the other person look dumb. Like both of those, the platform facilitated, and I kind of thought both of them were fun. Because that was when, like, I'm not going to get off on too much of a tangent complaining about Facebook and how it's changed, but like the notifications used to be a lot better. Like if you had commented on a comment thread, you would get notifications of like new comments on the comment thread, like very reliably, and it doesn't really do that so much anymore. So if there were like 10 people who had like commented on something and like you and someone else were going back and forth, like you could be pretty confident that the other people who had engaged would at least be able to like see it and be a bit of the popcorn gallery. And it showed more posts from people you followed and like topics you had engaged with, rather than just like brand posts and like a bunch of ads. And so there was a bit more of a feeling like it was productive to engage because there was like more of an audience almost. Like you and another person could hash something out and there would be enough other people that would see it that you could potentially, you know, shift opinions even for the people who were just observing and not participating. And Facebook is way worse for that now. And I think every other social media platform is like comprehensively worse for that, especially as more fitness stuff has moved on to Instagram. Like an Instagram post goes up, people are only going to look at the comment section one time. And so if you and someone else go back and forth a bunch, most stuff gets enough comments that no one's going to see that discussion in the first place. And two, if other people see it once, they're not going to come back and look again. So it's like, yeah, like if you enjoy having the debate with a single person, it's cool, but it does feel less productive in terms of being able to shift like more people's mindsets and perceptions around a topic, because it is like way more sequestered. And the only other way you can engage on a lot of the platforms now is like someone makes a post and you like screen cap it and then respond in your own kind of like top level post. But then that just becomes like silo-y and like echo chambery. And yeah, I don't know. Like I think the way that social media has changed over time has just made it feel like less rewarding and productive to engage in a lot of discussions like that. In real life, I do enjoy a friendly debate. And much like Milo, I think I have little debates with myself all the time. Like I'm a fan of like the Popperian notion of falsification. And so anything that I do think I believe from the research, I'm like constantly looking for the weaknesses in that position, or, you know, things that I believe to be true that there's just like insufficient evidence to currently support. So I am always like having that dialogue with myself and playing devil's advocate for things that I believe, which I guess is like kind of debatey. But yeah, that's, I think, my general orientation toward it.
Yeah, your comment about social media changing was spot on in the comment section, because it is mostly Instagram now, and crafting a huge response and organizing it and then posting it on Instagram just for a few people to see, and the formatting is it's all mobile optimized. I don't know. Back in the day, Facebook felt so much more rewarding when you did that. But yeah,
and you can't put clickable links in.
Exactly.
Like if you're trying to have a scientific discussion with someone, like you want to have sources, and you can put like the PMID in parentheses or whatever, but there's more friction to check that out. And like, I know that no one was looking at sources anyways, but like when you add even more friction to being able to check sources, people are going to be way less likely to do so yet. So yeah. Sorry, I cut you off, but yeah, just the fact that you can't put links in like makes it, if it's a debate that is reliant on scientific evidence at all, like not being able to link out just comprehensively makes a platform worse.
Yeah, for sure. What are some of the most heated debates you've had on Facebook? Like a couple on lifting specifically. I remember in our Facebook group I was arguing for you when you had come up with the article on the effect of PDs on muscle gain potential. And there were some percentages there that people felt some type of way.
Yeah, that was strength, I think, right?
Do what?
That was for strength, right? I remember people being very up in arms about you saying, actually, steroids only make you about 10%, 20% more competitive in strength sports because of weight classes.
Yeah, strength, people got mad about the hypertrophy one too. Yeah, there was a lot of bad blood related to that topic, I think. Yeah, I think those were probably some of the most knockdown, drag out debates, I guess. Yeah, anything around like steroids or like natty or not content, like people really get their hackles up about that. But also, I don't know, that was kind of the beginning of the end for me. Like losing my zest, I think, for some of the debates, because like, dude, the like almost exclusively when I would engage on those topics, I would just feel like I was, I don't know, I'm not trying to like sound mean or whatever. I mean, I guess I am. Who cares? Whatever. I would feel like I was just talking to just a wall or just a bunch of rocks, because like all of the counter arguments I would get would either be things that I had already directly addressed in the piece of writing that people were responding to. They'd be like, oh, you didn't think about XYZ. I'm like, I did. Like, here's a copy and paste or like a screenshot of where exactly in the article I discussed that.
Yes.
Or just like misrepresenting things I said in a way that like, I don't know what the principle of charity would dictate in a situation like that. It's like, is it more charitable to assume that you're like lying and operating in bad faith, or is it more charitable to assume that you're functionally illiterate? Like neither of those are charitable assumptions, but those are the only explanations for some of the things that I'd be getting. Like folks just attributing things to me that I never said and had like directly contradicted. Like, yeah. And so I think after that, it kind of black-pilled me on a lot of stuff, because I'm like, oh, most people just aren't going to fucking read this. And if they do, it's not going to matter because they're just going to misrepresent it. And even a lot of the other people in like following along with the discussion aren't going to read anything. And so, yeah, that was frustrating. So.
Yeah.
Was that around the time you started turning off comments for Control by Science? I think that might have happened around then, right?
No, that was a lot later, and that was for a completely different reason. Yeah, I did also enjoy arguing with people in the comment sections of the website, and if if the comments were still just like people arguing with me, I would have left them on forever because I thought that was fun. Um, the reason the reason we turned the comments off is like so more and more websites, I think circa 2015, 2016 started turning comments off. And so I think it started becoming a thing where like folks reading websites became like had less and less of an expectation of a comment section and less of an expectation of if I comment on this thing, other readers will respond or the author will respond and we'll be able to have a bit of a back and forth, either heated or productive. Like I think as more and more places started removing comment sections, like the switch kind of flipped. Like people would be less likely to seek out the comment section for that reason. And so like we just stopped getting comments about the articles themselves. Like people weren't engaging, people weren't trying to argue. We would get exactly two kinds of comments, which would be people saying like, oh, hey, love this article, it's great. Which like, on one hand, thanks. On the other hand, I don't know, like, this is going to sound really mean, but it's not going, I hope it doesn't sound mean. It's going to sound like I have self-worth issues, because maybe I do. I don't like getting compliments on my stuff. Like, it makes me very uncomfortable. It's like, if you like something I did, appreciate it in silence. I don't want to hear, because I don't like hardly anything that I do. And so if someone says, hey, I like, good job, congrats, I like this thing, my knee-jerk response is I want to argue against them. Like, I want to be like, no, you absolute swine. How can you have such bad taste? Like, I did my best, but it's still horrible. Like, that's how I feel. And so, like, I don't like positive feedback. Like, I genuinely dislike it. So, yeah, we get positive comments. My feeling would be, I appreciate the sentiment, but I wish you wouldn't. And that was like 10% of the comments we got. And the other 90% were just spam bots. And if all I'm going to get is like, good job and spam, like, there's no point in having comments. So we turned them off for that reason.
You absolute swine was nice. The one thing I'll mention, and then we can get into it, is what was annoying with Facebook arguments and arguments in text is that there is an unwritten sort of code of etiquette when arguing online, especially when you're getting deep into an argument, where I'm going to list my arguments one by one, the appropriate evidence to support each statement, blah, 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 and you have to acknowledge that versus not acknowledging all the points made and then arguing for, picking just one little point or one little piece of missing information, ignoring the rest and arguing based off that when that could, I don't know. I just found that many people would go down that route, which was just annoying, because then there's no point in me, as you said, arguing against a wall. Whereas in person, you can just repeat yourself and shout over the other person and say, address this, address this, address this, address this, until they leave your house in distress.
That is true. That is true. Okay, awesome. I think that's enough of a wind up about the concept of arguments and debates in general. So let's get into the meat of this episode. But before we do, quickly, just the standard plugs that we give up top of every episode. If you enjoy the show, please like, rate, subscribe, and tell your friends. It really helps us out. If you're interested in hiring a virtual coach to help you with your training and/or nutrition, Stronger by Science has a team of excellent coaches that can help you out. You can learn more at strongerbyscience.com/coaching. If you'd like to purchase supplements from a great source that has great prices and you want the prices to be even better, head over to bulksupplements.com and use code SBSPOD at checkout for an additional 5% off their already low prices. If you want to stay in the loop about all things going on in the Stronger by Science universe, check out our Facebook group and subreddit. That's Stronger by Science Community on Facebook, and reddit.com/r/Stronger by Science. Or you could do both. I'd recommend you do both. You can check out our newsletter. We send you high quality, informative content every couple of weeks, not just spamming you with a bunch of ads and sales material and whatnot. It is actually high quality, useful, productive stuff. You can head over and check that out at strongerbyscience.com/newsletter. And lastly, if you have questions that you would like us to address on the show, sometimes we post in the Facebook group and subreddit to solicit questions, and anything else. Our preference would be people recording quick audio clips and emailing them to podcast@strongerbyscience.com. We tend to use those for like general listener Q&A episodes, and for like targeted Q&A for specific episodes. We like that as well, but sometimes we forget to post threads asking with enough lead time for people to send in voice clips. And so, yeah, in those instances, such as this episode, we solicit questions from the Facebook group and subreddit and take plenty of text questions. But yeah, if you have questions for the podcast, our preference is recording a voice clip and emailing it to podcast@strongerbyscience.com. All right, so let's get into these debates and discussions. Pack, this was your idea, so I think you're kind of like emceeing this, right? So
Yes.
Would you like to introduce the first topic and let us know who the combatants are going to be?
For sure. So again, these were all randomly selected pre-recording using random.org, if I'm not mistaken, to find who's going to be.
The positions, not the questions.
The positions, yeah, not the questions. Yeah, that would be funny though. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to have one person going pro, one person going against, regardless of whether their actual stance is pro or against. So there will be some level of mental gymnastics required in some cases. And then a third person acting as a moderator, obviously not to moderate the debate itself, because these are going to be relatively short, with each person having 2 to 5 minutes for their response. But then it's up to the moderator to sort of create a summary of arguments and express what they believe is the truth, whether one side is more true than the other, whether the truth lies somewhere in the middle, and essentially give you the actual take, because I'm operating on the assumption that these topics are topics that we three mostly agree on in terms of our actual stance. But the fun of this episode is that we shall find out if we actually do agree, and there may be some mini sub-debates that will come as a result of that. So the first topic is the big three are must-do exercises for lifters looking to make serious strength and size gains. I will be arguing pro, Milo will be arguing against, and Greg will be the moderator here. So am I okay to get going? Greg, are you going to keep some sort of mental timer or actual timer? Do you want to tell me, okay, go?
Yeah, I'll just keep an eye on the clock on my computer. Yeah, it's not going to be super strict, but when you clear 5 minutes, I'll let you know to go ahead and wrap it up.
Perfect. Just for transparency's sake, although I knew of the topics yesterday, I did not prepare just so it's fair to to you guys actually, because you guys didn't know the topics, and I pinky swear, which is, is scientifically proven to be better than lie detectors at detecting whether somebody's telling the truth. So,
all right, let's get into it. So as the moderator, let me just say the person taking the pro side of this debate is already stalling for time. I think points are getting no, I'm just kidding. But yeah, let's do. I think pro always goes first, and then anti gets to knock it down. Okay.
Sure. So I'll
take it away.
argue. Yeah. So the big three, meaning squat, bench, and deadlift, I think, obviously my real opinion is not exactly that, but I think that you can make the argument that they are must-do exercises for lifters, because when you get into lifting and the culture of serious lifting and making gains for both strength and size, there is a cultural aspect to PRing on your squat, on your bench, on your deadlift, to following programs that are specifically centered around those lifts, and through training for the big three as a beginner lifter, and then keeping those exercises within your routine, that can sort of keep you closer to the culture of lifting, to the culture of hardcore lifting, where you essentially learn how to consistently push yourself. You learn how to do exercises that are hard, like the squat and the deadlift. And at the same time, they also give you plenty of experience when it comes to just general programming knowledge, some sports science knowledge, if you do decide to take your big three strength to the next level. From a hypertrophy standpoint, I guess there's a placebo effect that you can heavily leverage by reading articles on T Nation where the words mass builder are used, and the squat is the king of all exercises. Phrases like that are seen. So you may get a bit of a psychological boost where you're like, okay, instead of doing a leg press, I am doing the king of all exercises. This is really going to up my leg development and my overall strength. Plus, I get to train through different ranges of motion, get good at picking up stuff off the ground, blah, 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 blah. And overall, good exercises regardless of whether you're a power lifter or not, and something that I would say most lifters would benefit from having in their routine. This is as far as I can go with my backflips in my head and all the mental gymnastics I could do. I'm curious to hear what Milo has to say. Sorry, last thing, excuse me. No serious lifter or successful bodybuilder has not paid their dues doing the big three for a solid period of time. But yeah.
All right,
Milo, your response.
Let's do it. So, up front, I don't think the squat, bench, and deadlift are the worst thing to ever happen, but I have been coerced into taking the against stance, and so I'll do my best to give the against stance. First, I think I can pretty confidently argue that all three of the main lifts, as far as muscle growth is concerned, at least, are somewhat suboptimal, quote unquote. Like, there are certain things from the evidence that we can kind of at least be reasonably confident in. For instance, that to maximize hypertrophy, we at least want to get the target muscle reasonably lengthened, right? So for a lot of people, just doing a regular conventional deadlift, for one, you're unlikely to maximize the stretch on your hamstrings, simply because you're also bending the knees. And for two, even when it comes to the glutes and the adductors, or the adductor magnus and the gluteus maximus specifically, the hip extensors, even for those, for a lot of people, especially with certain builds, they won't necessarily get all that stretched. Similarly, you could make a decent case that at least the way most people within powerlifting perform the squat might not be best for growth, where if you're just squatting to powerlifting that at least, probably not ideal for hypertrophy. Now, the question didn't specify that we're talking about doing it to powerlifting standards, so I'll note that that is a bit of a caveat. And then finally, with the bench, I think that it's a fine exercise, and for a lot of people, it will be very effective or even maximally effective. But there is still a chance that for a non-negligible proportion of people, they could potentially get more hypertrophy by focusing on a better exercise selection that maybe focuses more on the stretch or what have you. In fact, there is more of a practical argument against the big three as well, and that is that for a lot of people, I think in practice, it can detract from other muscle groups. So if someone does choose to include the squat, bench, deadlift to a large extent within their hypertrophy program especially, oftentimes what I see happening in practice is that people spend their first hour of the session doing the squat, bench, or deadlift, and then they realize, oh, I have to be at the gym in half an hour, and I've got 5 exercises left. And then they often fail to get all of their accessory work in, which in the long term might compromise certainly their hypertrophy, especially if they're missing out on calf, ab work, bicep work, whatever you want to call it, and also potentially their strength if in the long term they're not getting as big as they could be because they're always thinking the big three are must-do exercises and they can't exclude them at any point. And then another sort of more practical consideration, and this is really not meant as medical advice, it's just something I've observed with myself and with some clients, is that thinking the squat, bench, and deadlift are must-do exercises does, in my experience, just cause me a bit more pain. Like, during the times where I focus on the squat, bench, and deadlift, if I am being very specific with those three movements, doing them a couple times a week at least, for weeks and weeks on end, at least I personally find that I will eventually experience some pain, some point, and that pain can often entirely be resolved by just omitting those exercises for a little bit, or just switching from the low bar squat to like a hack squat or a leg press. And that freedom of being able to change out exercises, I think, is pretty important. And then the final thing is just, if we're arguing the big three are must-do exercises, that inevitably places some constraint on exercise variation. And exercise variation, to an extent, seems to be beneficial for hypertrophy. Like, we don't just want to do one exercise for each muscle group. There was a meta-analysis, I think, by Cassiano and colleagues, if I'm not mistaken, around regional hypertrophy from exercise variation. Long story short, we don't just want one exercise per muscle group if we want to maximize overall hypertrophy. Not to say that you couldn't at least have a couple of exercises for each muscle group, but if you're always sticking with the big three, that may somewhat cause an issue with exercise selection and sort of variation over time. So overall, especially for hypertrophy, I think you'd be quite hard-pressed that the big three are must-do. Like, in fact, I can make a pretty good case that always including the big three will probably lead to you getting less muscular across your lifespan than if you ditch that rule altogether. And for strength, it entirely depends on what you mean by strength. Strength specific. Is it going to get you reasonably strong all around? Yeah. But could you do other movements and get similarly strong all around? Yes. So, depends on what you mean by strength, I guess. But overall, I think I am staunchly against this claim.
Okay. So that's the first round. Is there also like a second round for responses, or is it basically just like one back and forth and that's it?
One back and forth, and now you as the moderator have to give us your take based on the arguments presented. Where do you think the truth lies?
Sure. So I think both my take on the topic and my evaluation of the arguments presented are that Milo carried the day. Pack, the weakness of your argument, one, like I don't think it's true. I don't think the big three are must-do exercises for people looking to make serious strength and size gains. Like Milo pointed out, there are simply plenty of other exercises you could do. There is a case that could be made that the big three, for all of the muscles they train, may be suboptimal. And yeah. I mean, I don't think there's a super strong case that could be made that they are absolutely essential. Even some of the stuff that didn't come up in this little back and forth that people will sometimes trot out. Arguments like the hormone hypothesis, you do heavy lower body work. That is an argument that you frequently see in favor of the idea that in particular squats and deadlifts are necessary to maximize whole body hypertrophy. That didn't come up in y'all's back and forth, but that is a position that you see people take to support this concept. But even if someone's going down that road, it's like, okay, if you're saying that someone needs to do full body exercises that use a lot of muscle mass, like, why does it have to be squat and deadlift? Like, could it be farmer's walks? Could it be, clean and jerk circuits? Like, that's using more muscle mass than squats and deadlifts do. So yeah, I don't really see a way that someone could forcefully argue that the big three are absolutely essential, employing arguments that couldn't be applied to other lifts. So I think that is the correct position. But Pac, I do have to criticize the argument you made in that the topic of debate was the big three are must-do exercises for lifters looking to make serious strength and size gains. And all of the arguments you put forth were just generally positive things about programming around the big three. You were arguing that they are particularly good exercises to be doing, but in none of the arguments you put forth was there the implication that they were must-do exercises, just that there were some particular benefits to them. So just in terms of the structure of the argument, I don't think you actually argued for the position you were supposed to be arguing for. So
it was a difficult position to argue for.
You selected the questions, man.
Yes,
you were going to put someone in the position of arguing the pro here, so I appreciate you falling on your sword. But I do think purely just from a rhetorical perspective, you lost from the start because you didn't actually argue for the position.
I could have directly verbatim quoted certain authority figures that have released certain best-selling books in our niche, and essentially just have had like pages and pages of why the big three are must-do exercises. But I couldn't do that in the 30 seconds I had to prepare for it. But there are people out there still to this day with big following and people that are being taken seriously, and again have released plenty of educational material that are considered, like I watched a few videos last week where, the low bar squat specifically is non-negotiable if you're looking to build strength and size.
Honestly, man, you should have just hit me with the get stronger, bench 4 plates, and then you'll be jacked. Boom. That is all you needed to say. You would have won the debate then and there.
That's
true. But instead,
that's true.
Went about it in a lukewarm fashion.
Yes. I should have also said, cool, where is your 8 times Mr. Olympia titles, Milo? Because last I checked, the king, built his legs by squatting 800 Indeed. And deadlifted whatever he deadlifted. Anywho's, defeat is my second name now. So Patroklos defeat Androulakis Korakakis. It is what it is. We went at it, but now I'm going to hit you guys with always training to failure to maximize hypertrophy, with the pro stance being Dr. Milo Wolf, the against stance being Greg, and the moderator being me. So I think this will be quite interesting. Boy. You got this, Milo. I know you got it. Sorry, Greg, but this is a debate we've had between us as well. And I know my boy is somewhat prepared. I see you popping the nicotine gum. Let's get into it.
Yeah. I'm fearful because I know that Greg has written at length about this, even though it hasn't been released. And so I am concerned about this. But without further ado, let me get into it. First, I think you can make the epistemic case that most people are at least somewhat inaccurate at gauging reps in reserve. And so, even though you don't need to be perfectly accurate to get an effective stimulus in, if we take the assumption, that I'll get to in a moment, that training to failure maximizes hypertrophy, and that we're somewhat inaccurate, then training to failure gets us closest, on average, to actually being at failure. Or at least training to what we think is failure gets us closest to actual failure. So, there has been some evidence broadly supporting the idea that the closer a set is taken to failure, the more hypertrophy it might cause. The difficulty is we don't have evidence around the interplay, really much evidence around the interplay between relative intensity, or how close to failure a set is taken, and how much hypertrophy it causes, and how that impacts volume. Because two of the variables that seem to display the most of a dose-response relationship between that variable and how much muscle growth is caused are, one, how close to failure sets are taken, and two, how many sets per week are performed. Because we don't have studies to inform which one is more important, how one can impact the other, we could simply make the case that you should be training to failure always, as a means to minimize that inaccuracy and maximize the stimulus, because we do seem to have evidence in favor of training closer to failure being more hypertrophic on a set-per-set basis. And then two, equally, just training with the highest volumes that you can get away with and recover from for hypertrophy. And both of those can go hand in hand. I think, specifically, we can also, this isn't exactly Okay, this is going to be a hot take now. Are you ready? We don't have many direct findings in the evidence of overtraining syndrome with lifting. And therefore, I can make the theoretical case that if training to failure is more hypertrophic, and we don't often observe true overtraining syndrome in the way that people don't benefit from training more with higher sets, with closer to failure, most people, one, probably don't train hard enough overall to maximize hypertrophy potentially, and so they should take every set to failure because it doesn't take any additional time. And two, more specifically, the vast majority of people, or maybe even everyone out there, will run out of time or just give up before they truly hit recovery limits. Like, we just don't observe overtraining syndrome that often. And so I could argue that it is always best to train to failure for hypertrophy because, one, most people are time constrained, in which case you want to get more bang for your buck however long you're in the gym for. And two, even for the people who don't think they're time constrained and spend as much time as they do in the gym, I don't know that I've often seen too many people overtrain. And certainly from the evidence, that doesn't happen very often. And so training to failure always gets you more stimulus and gets you closer to failure, and probably doesn't cause you to overtrain, or at least for a lot of people, maybe for most people, in fact, or all people, wouldn't cause you to overtrain. I think specifically, you can also make the case that accuracy of reps in reserve is pretty good, or reasonable at least, until 5 or 12 reps. But for a lot of hypertrophy training, that will happen above 12 reps. And I'm drawing on a meta-regression we did by Halpern and colleagues a few years ago. Basically, even below 12 reps, people are inaccurate, often off by 1 rep, sometimes even more. But then above 12 reps is when people get more and more inaccurate. And so especially there is where it makes sense to train a failure very consistently. But you can again make the case that because people are at least somewhat inaccurate and training closer to failure is beneficial for hypertrophy, that just to minimize that offset between how close to failure you think you are and actual failure, it is recommended to always train to failure. I think that's about it. That's about as strong of a case as I can make for training to failure for hypertrophy always being beneficial. Yeah, that wraps it up.
All right. I have. Am I good to go?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I hear the arguments Milo is making. I think the fundamental premise that they rely on is that you do necessarily get a greater stimulus by training to failure versus leaving reps in reserve. The idea that it's a negative that some people struggle to accurately assess reps in reserve, that's a relevant argument if it is absolutely critical to be able to do so, because you do need to get really close to failure to maximize the hypertrophic stimulus. The idea that most people aren't actually nearing their recovery limits, that is also an argument that kind of like presupposes that it is, on a set-by-set basis, better to train to failure because you're going to get a greater stimulus. But people are concerned about recoveries. But if people aren't actually overtraining, then that's not as much of a concern. Therefore, there's, the case against training to failure is weakened because you can do so safely without overtraining. So yeah, that seems to be the fundamental premise underlying the arguments that Milo is putting forth here. The issue that I would take with them is that the evidence that you get a greater hypertrophic stimulus by training to failure versus stopping shy of failure, or even strictly getting closer to failure versus maybe staying a little bit further from failure. The evidence in favor of that proposition is surprisingly weak. So the strongest evidence that you could marshal to support that position would come from a meta-regression by Robinson and colleagues that was published earlier this year. And I think we've discussed on the podcast before. I also discussed it with Zach and Josh on the Data Driven Strength podcast, and that was like a 3.5 hour discussion. So not going to recap the entire thing here, obviously. But one of the things to note when looking at that meta regression is that you do see the trend of greater hypertrophy when training closer to failure when you pool all of the results. But in particular, when you split out the results based on intensity, what you see is that a lot of that effect does seem to be influenced by low load training studies where people are training with 20 reps in reserve or whatever. You see a much, much weaker trend in studies where people are training above like 60% or 80% of 1RM, where you see fairly similar hypertrophy without people pushing super, super close to failure. The slope of that regression line is a lot less steep and acute. And when you dig into the individual studies as well, the strongest evidence in favor of greater hypertrophic stimuli from training to failure comes from studies on untrained individuals. So there was a study by Godo and colleagues where there was a pretty large effect in favor of training to failure versus staying a little bit further. And probably the strongest evidence comes from a study by Martorelli and colleagues where subjects did, untrained women did bicep curls either to failure or a bit shy of failure. The effect size with training to failure was considerably larger. So that is where the strongest evidence in favor of increasing hypertrophic effects from training closer to failure comes from. However, when we look at studies on trained lifters, we don't see the same trend nearly as much. So there's a whole line of research by a Spanish group headed up by Pareja Blanco and colleagues that assigns training based on velocity loss per set, where greater velocity loss means you're training closer to failure. And oftentimes the greatest velocity loss in those studies is either 40 or 50%. And when loads get above like 75, 80% of 1RM, subjects, pretty occasionally to pretty frequently hit failure, depending what lift is being trained there. And even when they're not hitting failure, they're getting considerably closer to failure in those conditions versus the moderate velocity loss conditions, which is usually 20 to 25% velocity loss. And in the vast majority of those studies, with one notable exception, that being a bench press study, I think headed up by Gonzalez Badillo and colleagues, if memory serves. But with that one sole exception, all of the rest find similar hypertrophy in the moderate velocity loss condition versus the highest velocity loss condition in trained lifters, matched for sets, not even matched for volume load. So that is pretty consistent evidence in trained lifters against the idea that going closer to failure necessarily leads to a greater hypertrophic stimulus. Similarly, there was a 2021 meta-analysis by Davies and colleagues on the efficacy of cluster sets for promoting hypertrophy. And I know time is running out. I'm wrapping up. So cluster sets, you're inherently not training as close to failure when you're matching for total amount of work done. You might do 3 mini sets of 2 versus 1 set of 6 closer to failure. And you see faster velocities, higher power outputs, every lower lactate levels, every indication that cluster sets don't take you as close to failure. And most individual studies and meta-analyses on the topic of cluster sets find that they lead to hypertrophy that is comparable to traditional sets. And in fact, in the study with the most well-trained lifters in this entire body of literature, a paper by Carroll and colleagues from 2019, skeletal muscle fiber adaptations following resistance training using repetition maximums or relative intensity, use the most well-trained subjects that we've seen in this body of literature, and the group not training to failure, even with like number of sets equated between groups, the group not training to failure achieved a greater hypertrophy than the group training to failure. So I think that if we're approaching this from an evidentiary perspective, there's not particularly strong evidence that training to failure is better. And to the extent that such evidence exists, it is primarily in untrained lifters doing single joint exercises. When you look at the research on trained lifters, you do not see the same thing. Therefore, I think that cuts the legs out from under Milo's argument. And it, if you're not getting a greater stimulus by going to failure or closer to failure, then there are no unique benefits that Milo put forth and argued for that one would get from training to failure.
Great. So I will accept donations from both parties arguing to help me in my decision. But joking aside, I empathize with both viewpoints. Obviously, one of you guys was in the more difficult position to argue for something as absolute as the statement, always training to failure to maximize hypertrophy. However, I'll share that as a coach and having worked with a lot of people over the years, on particular exercises that we do not necessarily see in the literature that are often associated, at least anecdotally, with more discomfort, like RDLs or pause squats, etc. I have observed that some people at least are not that great with pushing themselves truly close to failure and actually going to failure and being asked to take a set to the point where they're unable to do another rep may have some benefit there. But I do agree with your stance, Greg. Overall, that training to failure, always training to failure, is likely not necessary. From my personal standpoint, I do think that taking some sets to failure is good practice as a way to calibrate your ability to accurately gauge your proximity to failure, although TNC apply. It's not like we've directly investigated that in the literature. But I will have to crown you as the king here, although I very much liked Dr. Wolf's arguments, because I think that's the most compelling case you can make for training to failure if you were to make one. But I know for a fact that that does not reflect Milo's actual opinion. So
also let the record show the arguments I put forth don't fully reflect my actual position either. I do lean more in favor of that perspective, but I'm arguing for a position. I'm going to take like a maximalist case that distorts and twists things a little bit in order to support what I'm trying to argue for, which is what I think we're trying to do here. But yeah, my general take is like, for like single joint exercises, I don't see a good reason to not train to failure. Like my take is more like practical than anything, I guess. Like, I don't know. I do kind of think that like going closer to failure probably leads to a greater stimulus, all things considered. But with heavy compound exercises, there are a lot of things you need to balance. Like, is taking a set of squats to failure going to just like wear you out and fuck you up so much that the rest of your workout is less productive, or like injury risk considerations, whatever. So yeah, I think that like heavy compound stuff, just do it in a way that's safe and productive. But then if I tell someone to do curls and they say, how many reps in reserve? I'm going to be confused. I'm going to say, what are you talking about? Like, what are reps in reserve when it comes to bicep curls? You're doing them to failure. Just do it,
The duality of a man, 20,000 word article on arguing against, and then, hey, just do the set to failure. Respect. Moving on, we have a topic that, again, I've seen certain people argue heavily against, but in this case, we're going to have one of us argue against. So sumo deadlifts for non-powerlifters. I'll be arguing pro, Mr. Greg will be arguing against, and Milo will be moderating. So...
All right, lads, are we ready? Pack, it's time for your opening statement, arguing for sumo deadlifts being included for non-powerlifters.
Sure. So I think that sumo deadlifts, given that they are a barbell compound exercise and a great alternative to the conventional deadlift for many people because of a variety of factors, including their own anthropometric characteristics, preference, and so on and so forth. Great overall exercise that one can include in their hypertrophy or strength or overall resistance training routine that can allow non-powerlifters to actually get into the lifting culture, get plenty of stimulus from them, and they're not an exclusive exercise that you have to do, that in the case that you have to do only sumo deadlifts for your lower body, your hamstrings, or your glutes. Great fun, especially if you get good at them, and a fantastic way for you to be included among your friends when you're deadlifting, especially if you find that your own anthropometric characteristics suit sumo deadlifts more than conventional. And in some cases, I have seen from working with individuals that the sumo deadlift is a much better option than the conventional deadlift, regardless of whether a competitive edge is trying to be gained. So overall, I'd say sumo deadlifts, excellent exercise for non-powerlifters to include as part of a balanced program. And I wouldn't have any issues with sumo deadlifts being inferior for whatever, posterior chain development, or just an exercise that is considered a cheat if you enjoy performing it and you can include it in your program. So nice and concise. I don't think there's much more to say. No, just kidding. I'm going to drop the mic, grab it with the other hand, and then pass it to Greg, because once we dropped the mic on stage and it broke, and then we had to pay for it. Actual story from one of the shows that we had done back in the day. So, yeah, the floor is yours.
Okay. So I will start by responding to the broad strokes of Pac's argument, much like I did in the last debate where I took the anti as well. Pac's argument seems to rely on the presupposition that some form of deadlifts should be in people's programs anyways, and the sumo deadlift is a valid and useful alternative to the conventional deadlift. Therefore, if it suits someone's anthropometrics better, it is a perfectly fine thing to include in one's program. And that would be an excellent position to take in general. But within the continuity of this episode, we've already established in the first debate that the big three are not must-do exercises for lifters looking to make serious strength and size gains. So I wouldn't necessarily think that it's a good idea to presuppose that some form of deadlift should be in someone's program in the first place, which significantly weakens my comrade's position. Some things that I will say against the sumo deadlift for non-powerlifters is, one, it's an exercise that's going to be subject to grip limitations. Thing about the deadlift is people can generally use quite a bit of weight, and oftentimes they're lifting more weight than they can comfortably grip with a double overhand grip, which would either mean that people need to learn how to use straps, which can be a little bit uncomfortable. It's another thing someone needs to purchase, bit of an accessibility barrier, or they're going to need to learn hook grip, which again, accessibility barrier. There's no reason that a non-powerlifter should need to learn that to deal with the discomfort of hook gripping. Or they're going to need to use a mixed grip, which may increase the risk of a bicep rupture, which seems like an unnecessary risk to take for someone who's performing this lift, not for a competitive reason. Second is that it's, I do think that it's a lift that will train the posterior chain somewhat well. But much like the argument previously about the big three being necessary to include, it's going to be suboptimal for all of your posterior chain muscles. You're not going to be taking any of them through the longest possible range of motion. In particular, likely your hamstrings won't be particularly well trained from it. And it's going to cause more fatigue than a lot of other lower body exercises you could do. Much like the arguments Milo made in the big three segment, you put too much focus on the sumo deadlift, maybe you're going to have less time and energy to do other lower body exercises that might be a bit more productive. And notably, with sumo deadlift versus conventional deadlift, is the sumo deadlift is a little bit more quad dominant, leg dominant, and a little less back dominant than the conventional deadlift is, or something like RDLs would be. And if someone's already including some sort of quad dominant lower body exercise in their program, like some sort of squat, leg press, etc., adding the sumo deadlift as well is a little bit redundant on that front too. And a note that I made is like, shorter range of motion and ego lift, but that's the lowest hanging fruit. And I think that's a weak argument. So I'm not going to make it. So just to wrap it up, I don't think Pac's argument presupposed that deadlift should be included in the program, which we've already established they don't necessarily need to be. It's more redundant with other lower body exercises than the conventional deadlift would be, and deadlifts in general for non-powerlifters, there are things about them that are less appealing, grip-related issues, etc. Not training all of the target muscles as hard as some exercise could. Therefore, I think that sumo deadlifts certainly aren't a necessity, nor are any sort of deadlifts, nor are deadlifts even necessarily recommendable to non-powerlifters because they have unique disadvantages that other posterior chain exercises wouldn't. And that obviously applies to the sumo deadlift as well.
Nice. I think you should have just ended it with a classic Rob Oberst quote of the risk to reward ratio of deadlifts isn't worth it. On a serious note, go for it.
Yeah, I should have hit you with the Greg Knuckles quote. The deadlift is one of the best exercises you can do to build muscle and strength. Take your sumo deadlift or conventional to the next level with his definitive guide on how to deadlift. But I was caught lacking in 4K, unfortunately.
Anyways, I think both of your stances were actually reasonable. Like, I'm kind of in a split stance, mostly because the initial statement, like the one you were arguing for or against, was much less absolute and definitive than previously. Previously, it was you need to train to failure all the time for hypertrophy, or it was the big three or must-do exercises. Whereas this time, I was like, sumo deadlifts for non-powerlifters, yay or nay? And I kind of agree with both of you. Like, I think for a lot of people, deadlifts can and should be included, and they can be nice to do with friends. Like, that's what Pac said, right? And a lot of people do enjoy deadlifting. And so, like, more people enjoy doing the sumo deadlift, I'd say, than doing RDLs, for example. Like, RDLs, very few people I know get that excited about RDLs and slapping on some more weight on RDLs. Whereas quite a few people I know get excited about including sumo deadlifts and chasing a new PR on that. So, in the context of not necessarily looking to optimize growth or strength and just should we include sumo deadlifts for non-powerlifters, I do think that bit of contextual information is good. But then I also agree with Greg that you don't need a deadlift in your program. Like, you just don't. You can get away with, like, you do a good morning and you probably get largely the same adaptations. I also agree that the hip extensor musculature doesn't get trained all that well. None of them get a maximum stretch. The hamstrings specifically get trained less well than they would during conventional because they are being kind of they're kind of like the rectus femoris, or kind of like the hamstrings during the squat as well, where they're shortening one joint and lengthening the other. One thing I'll push back on slightly is that the sumo deadlift might not be the worst thing ever from a range of motion perspective, just because it is relatively harder off the ground at longer muscle lengths. And there is some research maybe suggesting that having an exercise be more challenging in that stretch position might be beneficial for hypertrophy. So all else being equal, with conventional typically being more of a sticking point around mid-range and sumo more directly off the ground, maybe there is something there for sumo being something to potentially include for non-powerlifters. But then I for sure agree regarding grip limitations, that it's just an additional thing that most recreational gym goers shouldn't necessarily have to worry about. So yeah, like overall I would give it to Greg, just because I think the inclusion of one exercise as a categorical recommendation for a whole population is difficult. But I think honestly both make good points, and like all of these considerations are in my head when I'm coaching clients, like on both sides. So I think both made good points.
Only L's today.
I will say, I mean, we talked about this before we started recording. This is one where my actual take is, regardless of anytime this discussion comes up, no matter who wins or loses the argument, we've all lost, because anyone who's like getting super passionate about this one, I think they're barking up the wrong tree. I think, yeah, like if someone likes to do deadlifts and they're a non-powerlifter and they're built better for sumo, like, yeah, It's fine. But if someone doesn't want to do it, it's also fine to not do it. Like I don't understand how anyone could get so heated about this one, but I certainly see people get heated about it. But my actual take on this is, who the fuck cares?
Wise words.
I'm looking at 2 articles here, one titled "The Sumo Deadlift, What's the Point?" and the other one, "Why Almost Nobody Should Pull Sumo," and "Sumo is Wrong in Powerlifting Too." It's up to the viewer to find out who these articles and videos are from. It's a single source.
This is I hope I'm not about to just shit on people I generally like, but I don't know. I do. Here's my like actual take on it. I think the people who are getting the most heated about sumo deadlifts are just like people who are bad at deadlifts. Like I think most of the salt comes from people who have maybe lost on the deadlift to a good sumo deadlifter, and they're all up in arms about it. And my general take on that is like it's allowed. Like, you could learn sumo, or God forbid, maybe you're at a disadvantage because you're not built for sumo and the other person is, and cry me a river, because people who are built well for deadlifts tend to not be built that great for squat and bench. Like, you want to be lanky for the deadlift, you want to be stubby for the other two. And like, yeah, if you lost on the floor to a good sumo deadlifter, you should have built up a bigger lead in the subtotal. Like, that's my actual take. I think people who are salty are just salty because someone sumo deadlifts more than they conventional deadlift.
Yep.
The loser will speak now. So, all right, let's do this. Extreme How Random has blessed me. I mean, okay, this will be a bit different. So we have old-school bulking, 10 to 20% surplus, although I think 10 is not really old-school bulking. Wouldn't old-school bulking be more like 20 to 30?
I mean, 10 is pretty high, right?
It's pretty, yeah. I mean, it's
10, like for me, let's say that would be
400
like nearly a pound of weight gain a week.
Solid.
Which,
cool.
like, that's thick.
The idea with the title was old school bulking, where you're gaining a ton of weight and you're on a substantial surplus. Pro is you, my friend, Dr. Milo Wolf. And I have to argue against you, although I did not want to. And moderator, obviously, Dr. Greg Knuckles, real doctor, terms and conditions apply, non-medical advice.
PhD, MD.
And also not fake doctor either.
And a master of arts.
Yes.
That's true.
That's me.
Let's go.
All right, let's get into it, guys.
I'm very curious to see what Milo has to say about this, given his recent stance on bulking.
Off the dome. We have some research on bulking, right? But we don't have a lot of it. But the research we do have does generally find a benefit in favor of the people that gain more weight, gain more fat-free mass. We don't have a ton of studies looking directly at muscle thickness, for example, by ultrasound. And typically the way that we measure fat-free mass, that would also get confounded by additional glycogen or what have you. But generally, across the studies we do have in bulking, I think we have 4 now, roughly, if I'm not mistaken. We have a study by Smith and colleagues, a study by Helms and colleagues, a couple other studies that I can think of. Generally, directionally, bulking and larger surpluses does lead to more muscle mass gained, with the confounders obviously being a TNC. Now, specifically in the study by Smith and colleagues, they used Bayesian methods and they drew a sort of correlation of, not a correlation, just essentially a regression of how much muscle was gained relative to how big of a percentage increase in body weight there was. And by and large, with a 2% body weight increase per month, I think is what, from what I recall, on average is like a rate of weight gain. All of that gain was fat-free mass. So even at 2% of body weight gain per month in that one study, pretty much all of the observed increase in weight was increase in muscle size. And when you went beyond that, obviously, because it was a linear regression, you gained even more muscle. But at the very least, even rates of weight gain as high as 2% per month didn't cause excess fat gain in this one study. Similarly, you can make the case that the athletes that are largest, namely sumo wrestlers, also have the highest fat-free mass, or generally just carry the most muscle. So I think it's more likely that they gain the muscle throughout the process of gaining that weight, and gaining weight relatively aggressively oftentimes, because they went from relatively normal-sized human to relatively oversized human, of often weighing up to like 200 kilograms or what have you. It is more likely to me that they gained that muscle in the process of bulking, and often bulking quite aggressively. And they also ended up being the most muscular athletes on Earth, by and large. And so the idea that they're bulking quite aggressively and they have special diets, and often are with using diets with high surpluses, that they end up having the highest fat free mass, it is interesting observational data at the very least, in the absence of much empirical data, to support the fact that if you want to maximize your muscularity, there's a chance that you just gotta turbo bulk. You gotta just do it. So yeah, like pretty much all the studies by Garth, by Smith, by Helms do generally find more favorable outcomes with the higher rates of weight gain. And by Garth and Smith, I think the rates of weight gain were in excess of 10 to 20% surplus. So if you truly want to maximize your hypertrophy, I think you need a 10 to 20% surplus or more. If you truly want to maximize it, no matter the cost, sacrifice to win style, a certain number of weeks out from the Ruby Classic. Like, if you truly want to maximize your hypertrophy, there is a good chance that you need at least a 10 to 20% surplus. That is, I think, a more evidence-based stance than to argue the contrary. I think you are compromising hypertrophy if you're maintaining, or if you're losing weight, or even if you're doing a very moderate bulk. Like, pure hypertrophy-wise, you are compromising hypertrophy. So if you truly want to get jacked, old-school bulking is where it's at. Now, let's not talk about body fat, but if you just want to get jacked, old-school bulking is the key.
Awesome. I will just say I lose, and that's an established truth. Greg agrees. Thank you for watching. We will see you guys next time. Thank you for listening, actually. Bad habit. So, joking aside, nice. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I will start by saying that, first of all, like, the idea of bulking, at least in our world, is usually... bulking is something that you do in order to build muscle mass, to then eventually get rid of some of the excess fat and reveal your very muscular physique. So the idea of old school bulking, I appreciate the point of maximizing hypertrophy regardless of whether you end up at a very high body fat percentage at the end. But for the majority of people who consider bulking, at least that's what I've observed, gaining a ton of body fat will probably result in a dieting period that may not be successful. It may be hard for some people to rebuild eating habits, especially if they've gone full on dreamer bulk. At the same time, I do think there is a bit of a survivorship bias with old school bulking and positive results. Namely, we may tend to see mostly the high responders, classic pictures of like Lee Priest and Jay Cutler used as examples when making the case for turbo bulking, or like super elite powerlifters that are also on a bunch of PEDs where they look fatter than usual, but they're also insanely muscular. So I do think that we are not exposed so much to all the stories, much like the infamous dreamer bulk, to all the stories of the poor folk that listened to those bodybuilders telling them to just gain as much weight as possible, and as natty, average genetic individuals ended up being much fatter than they would have liked without actually a ton more muscle gain. As far as the literature goes, I appreciate Dr. Wolf's stance. At the same time, we do see comparable gains in muscle size with different surpluses. There was a recent study as well published by, what was it, Sanchez et al. Or something, where they didn't see greater gains with a 10% surplus than a 3 or 4% surplus. And even from the Helm study, there were some differences for the biceps that were trained with greater volumes, but overall it wasn't such a big difference. And I do think that going down, based on the current scientific evidence, the fact that a lot of people that engage in bulking and cutting are, drug-free, non-elite genetic freaks, approaching their bulking phase, assuming they do eventually want to have a leaner, more muscular physique, or a physique that where they can see the muscle size that they've actually gained, going down the more conservative route where they're still gaining weight, just not a ton of weight, while also training in the gym makes more sense, especially given the muscular potential of the majority of individuals, whereas after a few years, things are going to be extremely slow anyways. So the idea of committing to a YOLO bulk, gaining 10 to 20 pounds of fat for 2 to 4 pounds of muscle may actually lead to them training less in a surplus over the long term, because they will have to spend an appreciable amount of time dieting. That can potentially come with some muscle loss as well, given the data that we have on energy deficits and how that impairs muscle growth. So overall, I don't advise, for the majority of people, I don't think that old school bulking is the way to go, although it can be fun. And personally, I have gained over 80 pounds in the span of a few months, so don't at me when it comes to YOLO bulking. That's my stance. Thank you so much for listening. Dr. Greg.
Okay, not a doctor. I think that, I this is going to be a cop out, but whatever. I'm the judge. I think I'll give it to both of you.
Is it rigged against me?
Okay. I was going to try to give you half a win here, but since you're pushing me on this pack, I'm going to further deduct an additional point, because you're the one who formulated these topics, and I think that this is one where, like, the topic on the outline here is just old school bulking, school spelled with a K, I'll note, and it's just that's it. Both of you even had to infer that the topic was for the purpose of maximizing muscle growth. Like, that's not even in the question. So I think it's a poorly formulated debate topic where it maybe could have been designed to more easily have a winner or a loser if the debate topic was formulated in a more precise way.
I mean, for enjoyment, it's no contest. I win. Everyone loves old school bulking.
That is true. That is true. But yeah, no, I think the positions both of you ended up taking have merit. Obviously, I do think the research does generally support the idea that a big old surplus is probably going to maximize hypertrophy. Even the studies where that you would use to argue against the idea that a large surplus is beneficial, like Garth, for instance, they didn't find statistically significant differences between larger and smaller surpluses. But if memory serves, in the large surplus group, people gain like 1.8 or 1.9 kilos of fat-free mass. And in the small surplus group, it was like 1.3, 1.4. Not statistically significant, but things kind of leaned in that direction. So yeah, I think you can easily make the case that a large surplus is ideal for absolutely maximizing how much fat-free mass you gain. But then when you get into more practical considerations of, do you want to then spend 5 years cutting because you push the dreamer bulk a little too hard, then I think you can look at the research through another lens and say, hey, it seems like people can gain virtually all of the muscle, maybe leaving a little bit on the table by taking a smaller surplus. And I think the research broadly supports that as well. So for the positions you took, I'm calling it a draw. But Pac still loses because he formulated the topic poorly.
Well, okay. I will not defend myself further.
The draw is cancelled. You lose now.
Oh, yeah, I'm leaving with half a point here and very little dignity. Perhaps I can save some dignity now, because we are we're approaching the end of these mini debates, with the last topic being lifting weights for more than 60 minutes per week for health, specifically. Any criticisms about the title here, gentlemen? Just kidding. I'll be arguing pro, Milo against. Greg, unfortunately, you are the moderator yet again, with random.org to blame. And by random.org, I mean me, who randomly chose this based on preference. Just kidding.
I'm cool with that. I won both of mine. Like, just being the moderator from here on out, I'm preserving my flawless record. So yeah, put 5 more on here. Make me the moderator for all of them. I'm happy as a clam.
Next time I'm just gonna go old school on you and just start crying every time I lose, and then just make it super uncomfortable for everybody. All right.
There are methods of rhetoric and persuasion here that none of us have employed yet. You know, I think we're heavy into the logos and very, very light on the pathos. So if anyone wants to mix that up for the last one, I would also be happy to judge your fake tears.
All right, just pulling out the Greek passport for the words logos and pathos used. You're welcome. But you actually revealed to us how we could beat you. We could just say, hey, Greg, amazing debate points. That was the best debate ever. And then just watch you just go and just argue against yourself. But this is theater. I would fake it. Like, I'd be dying inside, but yeah. That's awesome. Best episode ever. Not biased. So, lifting weights for more than 60 minutes per week for health. I'll go for, and Milo against. So I shall start if, Greg, that's okay with you.
Take it away.
Perfect. So although we see from the current available literature that health benefits for lifting past 6 minutes seem to not be there, obviously with limitations and co-founders, I would argue that the act of lifting itself, assuming that we count lifting as moderate exercise or in some cases vigorous exercise, based on the totality of evidence on vigorous exercise and health, where somewhere between 150 to 300 minutes seem to be enough to maximize the reduction of risk for all-cause mortality. I'd say that going above 60 minutes makes sense. We also did a psychological benefits of lifting episode recently, where we talked about some of the good things that lifting can do for your mental health. So there is that as well. Additionally, lifting weights does not need to be the traditional sort of definition that some people have, where lifting weights is, doing strength training or doing a bunch of very, very hard workouts that just look like grueling bodybuilding or powerlifting workouts. It could literally be conditioning style workouts, drop sets, supersets, more fun stuff, which I would assume count towards your overall health in the form of moderate or vigorous exercise. Additionally, potential social benefits from lifting more than 60 minutes per week, where if you go to a gym and you have a little community there, that's also something to be taken in consideration for your mental health, and so on and so forth. And overall, if you are a lifter and you've bought in the lifting culture, it will be very difficult for you to sort of commit to just 60 minutes per week without missing out on some of the cool stuff that we as lifters get to try over the years, namely programs that allow you to maximize muscle growth, which can then, have some mental health benefits. But anyways, you miss out on a lot of the fun, which I could argue may not be the best thing for your health. But the main argument here is that doing more than 60 minutes can still potentially contribute to your health as a form of overall physical activity. And that's my stance.
All right.
Now, here comes the real argument. Let's go.
So, first off, just to come out guns blazing a little bit, towards the end of the argument, you pointed towards fun being a reason. That is not part of the premise. The premise is lifting weights for more than 60 minutes per week is a good idea for health. Fun, I don't know if I'd call it part of health. I think the evidence at this point is tentative. but it is leaning towards more than like 60 minutes not necessarily being much more beneficial, if not even detrimental to your health. So we have a couple of meta-analyses from the past couple of years. I'll just refer to the one I'm aware of most familiarly by Mama and colleagues from 2022. There has been another one with basically the same results, and looking at about between 4 and 6 cohort studies to look at all-cause mortality, risk of cardiovascular disease, cancer, and diabetes. 30 to 60 minutes of resistance training per week minimizes risk for these outcomes, basically. And going past 30 to 60 minutes starts increasing the risk for those things again. So by 130 to 140 minutes per week, you're back at baseline being not doing any lifting at all for all-cause mortality, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. So if you go past 130 and 140 minutes a week, so you go much past like 2 hours, 15, 20 minutes, whatever, you are then, at least based on these cohort studies that aren't really designed to infer causality whatsoever, but you are at higher risk of having cardiovascular disease, cancer, or dying, essentially. Another argument you made was that it can be more fun and there's more sociability. Now, health is multidimensional. It isn't just physical health. It isn't just mental health. It isn't just social health. It's a combination thereof. But I do think, one, based on the mental health research, most of the benefits are seen at very low doses as well. And though we don't have cool meta-regressions that I'm aware of on lifting dose per week and mental health, I wouldn't be surprised if past 60 minutes, we also didn't really see an effect anymore. At the very least, the effect seems to be very front-loaded, or there are heavily diminishing returns even for lifting for mental health. And then finally, including sort of social health now, I think that mental health and social health are at least somewhat part of all-cause mortality as well. Like, all-cause mortality is a very umbrella variable to measure, and, poor mental health can impact, for example, risk of suicide and other things. And so there is going to be some all-cause mortality risk is going to be some proxy for overall health, not just physical health. And even that seems to increase past about 60 minutes, at least in these cohort studies. So I think really at this point, you don't have any evidence to lean on to say that past 60 minutes a week is better for health. And I think if anything, the evidence leans towards that being untrue and it actually being detrimental for health. Like, outside of purely relying on mechanistic evidence, I just don't think there's any leg to stand on to make that claim. Like mechanistic evidence as in like resistance training increases muscle mass, which staves off sarcopenia in old age and reduces frailty. But then all of the cohort studies we have on that topic just point the other way. And in general, I think we all are kind of on the boat that although we're not relying on randomized controlled trials here, we are relying on empirical data looking at the actual outcome of interest. And that is pointing towards your claim being untrue. So that is ultimately what I come down to.
All right. Adjudicating this one is tough because, my hunch is that lifting weights for more than 60 minutes per week probably continues to accrue benefits for health. But Pac was put in the unenviable position of there not being a great evidence to support that contention. If I were Pac and I were taking the pro side of this debate, one thing you could have potentially leaned on is like the all-cause mortality stuff and the cancer mortality stuff. You could make the case that those are mere associations. Like, hey, we observe this, but there's no kind of mechanistic reason that one should assume that they're causal. So this is probably some residual confounding. There's like some underlying variables that weren't appropriately controlled or adjusted for. But one of the things that the meta-analysis of cohort studies on this topic did find is that it did appear that higher doses of weekly resistance training were associated with further improvements in insulin sensitivity. if memory serves, or lower rates of type 2 diabetes, something related to glucose management. And there are like clear mechanistic links there. So I think you could have strengthened your argument a little bit by arguing that the potentially negative cohort studies that we're seeing, the outcomes that weren't beneficial for your position were mere associations, and the one that would be beneficial for your position is more likely to be causal, which I will kind of admit that's sort of how I feel about the topic. But this is tough because like on a gut level, I do agree with Pac on this one. Like I do think it probably continues to be beneficial, but I think that Milo had the stronger arguments for this actual mini debate. So with a heavy heart, I have to give Milo the win.
Another one. I agree more with Milo than with my stance. TBH, with the only caveat being what I mentioned about, if we count resistance training as moderate physical activity, whether that contributes there. But I don't know. I feel that, and what you've said, Greg, in the past about, hey, being alive and being healthy enough to be alive in the long term is probably not such a huge ask from your body. I do think that based on the literature on hypertrophy and strength, and the literature on muscle mass and strength for longevity, like with 60 minutes of focused resistance training per week, there may be a bit more benefit to gain with more time spent in the gym. But I don't know if I am convinced that you'd be looking at a ton more health gains, especially if overall physical activity is in check. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, that is kind of my position. Like in general, what we see is that more moderate to vigorous physical activity, and even low intensity, just more physical activity in general, tends to be beneficial. And that is observed across a lot of different kind of like subcategories of physical activity as well. And so I find it a little bit implausible that resistance training would be the one exception to that rule, where past 60 minutes, like walking or jogging or doing yoga or whatever, for like 2 hours a week may not be like that much better than 1 hour per week, but it does tend to be better. And resistance training being like the only thing where that's flipped and like doing 2 hours is a little worse. But yeah, I think that 60 minutes of resistance training plus 60 minutes of some additional physical activity is probably better than just 60 minutes of resistance training. And if that additional 60 minutes is more resistance training or jogging or yoga or whatever, that's what I tend to think. Like I can't think of a good reason why that extra 60 minutes of resistance training would be like deleterious when other forms of moderate to vigorous physical activity seems to be beneficial.
Nice.
Yeah. No, it is with a heavy heart that I do not play both sides on this argument. So I do fall just gut feeling and hunch with Greg in terms of I don't intuit that lifting for more than an hour a week would be worse for health. Relative to just lifting for an hour a week.
Mm-hmm.
But equally, I can't really have my cake and eat it too. What I will say is that we don't have many studies, and they're cohort studies, so I'm not making a strong claim either way. But I can't have my cake and eat it too, and rely on purely mechanistic reasoning for this at the expense of empirical data, and then for other topics say, no, it's all about the empirical data. I do think that we're generally epistemically better off, on principle, all else being equal, relying on empirical data versus mechanistic data, empirical data of the outcomes we actually care about versus mechanistic data. So, yeah, I agree with both of you, actually. But yeah, I think just based on the evidence, with this being the Strong by Science podcast, my stance was the easier one to argue for.
Yeah, I am sympathetic to that take, with the proviso that I don't know. I I don't necessarily think that like all empirical evidence deserves the same weight, I guess. And like I take that approach to, yeah, like I don't know, the like epidemiological research and like cohort studies, I maintain quite a bit more skepticism towards them just in general, especially depending on like how they're conducted. So if it's like the type of cohort study where you have like a really large sample and it's like targeted, like if you're if there was something specifically on resistance training where they really went out of their way to make sure that the people doing resistance training were like matched in all measurable regards to the people that weren't, and you're still seeing the same sorts of trends, I'd be like, okay, that's stronger evidence. Otherwise, like, yeah, like a lot of things where it's like basically just we collect the data and look to see what the associations are. Even if you're doing some adjusting, like I maintain more skepticism towards that, even if it goes in favor of stuff that I tend to agree with. So like the, the stuff around just resistance training as a binary variable and longevity. Like there was a meta-analysis finding that it was associated with a 20% reduction in all-cause mortality, just doing resistance training versus not. And like, I'm also similarly skeptical of that. Like I do suspect that it has positive effects, but I do also kind of suspect that overstates the magnitude of the positive effect. So yeah, I don't know. Like I think rely on evidence, but kind of weight the strength of the evidence. And I do think that this is like, I think cohort studies are just in general kind of lower quality evidence, at least for drawing causal inferences, than RCTs certainly. And I think that there's kind of scales to the strength of evidence you can get from cohort studies. And I think that the stuff we have on this topic is among the weaker evidence that one could get from cohort studies. So yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things where like I'm more sympathetic to not leaning quite as hard on the evidence just due to kind of the characteristics of the evidence itself.
Yeah, I think that's an entirely defensible take. And it is, unfortunately, like I noted in the episode on mental health and lifting, we don't have as much research on lifting versus just exercise more broadly and aerobic exercise. So it is more difficult to draw somewhat confident conclusions on the topic.
And that wraps up the SBS Battle Royale. We didn't even say the title of this episode, but that's what it's called. But that wraps up the debating section. Feelings?
I think it was fun. If I'm giving just like my kind of unfiltered opinion on air now that we've done it, I did enjoy it. I did think it was fun, but I do think that if we do it again, like if the feedback is generally positive, we maybe should do like a couple more cycles on the topics selected. I did feel like with some of these, there was like almost like a designated winner and loser, just based on the three of us all having a pretty decent grasp of the evidence on these topics, and the evidence on one side being kind of strong and the evidence on the other side being kind of weak. So I think maybe if we did it again, things that were kind of like more of toss-ups where there is like, yeah, I thought that like old school bulking was good. I thought that training to failure for maximizing hypertrophy was good. And lifting weights for more than 60 minutes I thought was good. Sumo deadlifts for non-powerlifters and big three being must-dos. Yeah, I thought that those were
amazing.
Yeah. But overall, I enjoyed it. I think it was a strong foundation to build upon.
I think it's cool to hear hear of course, obviously there was a dedicated winner and loser, with the dedicated loser being me. But it was, I think it's cool for people that see those arguments online and often see very weak arguments that have sort of been debunked time and time again. See yourself, Milo, myself, people that are more in the evidence-based trenches trying to argue for them, because I think that may sort of expose them to parts of that argument that they hadn't seen before. For example, on like sumo deadlifts, or even on the bulking side, where you'll see some things being said by specific individuals that consistently say that thing over and over again. But I do feel that some people may be like, okay, is there more to the story? Is there something else besides that? Have we not thought of all the against arguments here? But please do let us know if you enjoyed this and you'd like more episodes in the future like this.
Yeah, I did think it was fun. I thought this was a really good idea, Pack.
Thank you so much. Shall we get into some creative Q&A? I asked for creative questions. Some are more creative than others, but I'm excited for these.
Yeah, let's do it. I'd be happy to read us in.
Please.
All right. So the first question here is from Aspiring Human Dorito. Says, there's an old urban legend that ancient gladiators used to chew on bull testicles as an early form of PEDs. Is there any scientific basis to the idea that I should be downing Rocky Mountain oysters before I go out for my next bench PR? On a scale from creatine to trenbolone, how much of a performance boost should I expect?
Yeah. So I'm going to say I'm not super familiar with, because this essentially is, it kind of falls under the purview of PD science, I think, almost, because ultimately, like, orals being a thing, people have researched how to make orals actually impact hormonal levels versus just being filtered by your liver, I think? Kidney? Liver? I can't remember which one now.
Yeah.
There you go. My understanding is that because it isn't... it is essentially just going to be the testosterone in, even if there is some in bull testicles, is just going to be filtered out by your liver because it isn't attached to the right compound to make it pass through that. And so essentially, on a scale from creatine to trenbolone, I think it's below creatine in that I don't think it does anything. But I think Greg is the one with more of a... more knowledge regarding that sort of stuff. So very happy to be corrected.
No, I think you're correct. Yeah. So like oral. So okay, there is, I assume, like some degree of testosterone present in bull testicles. I don't know if there is or isn't, but I'm sympathetic to the idea that there might be. But if there is, that is still like probably fairly irrelevant, because like Milo said, if you were to ingest testosterone, like if you were to just take like testosterone pills, it's not going to do anything for you, because for things to have a biological effect, they need to make it to the target tissue intact and ready to rock. And people that use steroids don't inject it just for fun. The reason that you tend to inject it is any like lipidy thing that you consume, it goes into your digestive tract. It's, kind of emulsified into your bile, and then it's basically taken to the liver before it goes out to general circulation. Primary reason for that is a lot of like toxins and stuff are lipid soluble, and your liver is what your body uses to like detoxify stuff. So yeah, any like lipidy thing, like your liver kind of wants to take a peek at it before it says, okay, this is safe to go into the bloodstream. And yeah, your body regulates testosterone levels pretty tightly, and if you were to consume testosterone, if it was absorbed in the first place, like if it made it through the intestinal lining, it's going to get taken straight to the liver, and it's going to look at it and say, this is a bunch of testosterone that shouldn't be here. So we're going to metabolize and excrete some of it. And to the extent that some of it makes it into circulation, your body's going to say, okay, let's reduce endogenous production a little bit, such that like even if a little bit does make it in, like your total testosterone levels wouldn't be meaningfully affected. So yeah, that's why most of the time when people are taking steroids, they're injecting them. And so you might say, hey, what about orals? Like people do take orals, pop pills. What's going on with that? And that's exactly what Milo said. The chemical descriptor for oral anabolics, like most of them fall under the heading of 17 alpha alkylated anabolic steroids. You'll also see 17 NOR as like a descriptor of them. But basically, like any steroid hormone is composed of like multiple carbon rings, and you can kind of count the carbons. Like each carbon position has a number associated with it. And the 17th carbon, if you add either a methyl or an ethyl group on it, I'm not totally sure how this works biochemically, but you add that in, and when you absorb it and it makes it to the liver, I think just has greater issues metabolizing it. And so instead of metabolizing it and excreting it, it does make it into systemic circulation. So that's what's going on with oral steroids. And that's also why oral steroids tend to have greater hepatotoxicity. Like they're worse for your liver than injectables tend to be. That's because they've specifically been modified to make it harder for your liver to metabolize them so you can take them orally. And anyway, yeah, I don't think there's a ton of 17 alpha alkylated anabolics in bull testicles. So yeah, it probably isn't going to do anything for you, except for maybe like placebo or expectancy effects if you think it's going to do something cool for you. Yeah, but physiologically, it's probably not doing much, if anything.
But Red Bull was made off bull's sperm, as far as I recall, and that gives you wings and also raises testosterone. Have you heard about the...
I know you're... Wait, are you shitposting?
Yes. No, I am on Stronger by Science claiming that Red Bull gives you wings. Imagine though I actually take out a couple of wings now, and it's like this turns into like a conspiracy theory episode.
Well, I assume, but do you know where the rumor that it was made from like bull semen or whatever comes from?
Yeah, yes, but I don't remember. I remember looking into it and there being not some like proper truth to it, but something to it, right? Gone?
Yes. It's the taurine.
Yeah.
Like it has caffeine and taurine in it. And taurine, the taur, like tauros, the bull.
It's bull in Greek. Yeah.
Yeah. And so people kind of like made that connection, and I think spun an urban legend around it. But taurine is called taurine basically because it was just first isolated from the bile of bulls. And so they're just like, hey, here's a new amino acid. We found it in bulls first. Let's call it taurine. But it's like it's ubiquitous. Like it's in a lot of stuff. But once you give something a name, it's hard to change the name. So it continues to be called taurine. A lot of dairy products are particularly good sources of taurine. Like I think like Greek yogurt, or not Greek yogurt, cottage cheese has like particularly high levels of taurine, but you can also find a lot of it in like fish and shellfish products. But yeah, just since it's called taurine, and when Red Bull put it on the market, a lot of people just hadn't seen that word before. I think people just kind of ran wild with it. But yeah, it's just kind of like a normal thiol containing amino acid that happened to first be isolated from bulls.
Yeah, that was a big deal in Greece when Red Bull became a thing back in the day. Because of taurine, which is tavrin in Greek, and everybody instantly thinks of bulls. And do you know about the lawsuit, the Red Bull lawsuit about Red Bull not giving you wings?
No.
So obviously, take this with a pinch of salt. I haven't looked into it properly, but the lawsuit was reported as somebody suing Red Bull because it didn't give him wings, and the claim being that. But looking into the actual lawsuit, the actual claim was that, guys, you're advertising this as like an F1 performance boosting drink and this sort of performance enhancer, and it just contains 80 milligrams of caffeine. Like, this is really not a product that gives you wings, even metaphorically. And they actually won, because like Red Bull is one of the weakest energy drinks, especially like regular sized Red Bull. Like you're talking the same amount of caffeine as 3 cans of Diet Coke. Whereas you guys in the States, being civilized, your Reign energy drinks have 300 milligrams of caffeine versus us peasants here with our 200.
But counterpoint, and I hope I'm not going to make any Reign fans upset hearing this. It's terrible. Like most of the
no, watch it, pal.
No,
you're walking on very thin ice here.
The newfangled. One of my biggest boomer takes is I think virtually all of like the newfangled energy drink companies are terrible. I'm sure the products work, but I think they taste like absolute dog shit.
How can you be a boomer and not like the White Monster drink at least?
No, I like White Monster. Like I like Monster. Okay, I like Rockstar. I like Red Bull.
Red Bull. I think that's a hot
Reign
take
is
right
OP, there. Bro. Reign flavors like the
White
Milo
gummy bear. Woo.
I am legit looking forward to landing in New York City on Sunday and drinking Reign with 300 milligrams of caffeine and going to Walmart and buying Reign for the entirety of the trip. That's literally what we do every time we go to the States. Abuse caffeine via Reign and coffee.
Yeah, I mean, I abuse caffeine as well. I just think that they taste. I just think those taste bad. Like here's my thing. Like, and this could just be, you know, just stuff that I got used to, like it associations with like childhood and whatnot. But like, I think the old energy drinks, like the ones that are like the older brands, they had a bit of like bitterness to them that, and like, I'm going to sound like such a snob, but like, I felt like the flavors were just like a little more complex, because like they're obviously sweet. They have sweeteners in them. They all tend to have some sort of like lemon limey type of thing going on in the background. Like there's a little sourness, and then there was just like a touch of like harsh bitterness, but like like in the same type of way that like coffee or tea is nice. Like the little bit of bitterness is good. I think the new ones, I think they sanded down those rough edges, and so they just have like very smooth flavors that to me just feel flat, I guess. That's just my opinion. That's just my opinion. I think they suck though.
I like how you took a step back and then you're like, no, they suck. We accepted. Okay, we're open-minded here. This is the SBS podcast. Please.
All right. Next question. So Thomas Markov says, what's the most unusual or unorthodox movement you've trained for an extended period of time, and why?
Pac, you want to take it first?
I'll say you take it first, because I have to think. You're a freak when it comes to that.
I mean, it depends on what you mean by unorthodox. One I did for a while, which I just found very fun, was the single arm standing dumbbell overhead press. It's just fun because you're pressing one weight overhead and you can kind of bend it to the side, and it just feels like a very cool movement to do, like even cooler than the standard overhead press in my opinion. So I just did that for a while, even though it doesn't offer any particular benefits in my opinion over any other overhead pressing variation. Unorthodox movements though, I have been known to do some strange stuff for my quads. For a while now, I've been blasting the sissy squats without a machine. So essentially just doing limbo, like going onto your tippy toes and then flexing your knees while keeping your hips fully extended, and even sometimes arching my spine as a means to make the bottom part of the movement even more challenging. I've been doing that movement for years now, and prior to the whole long muscle length stuff, I used to get some very strange looks for it. I probably still do, but I just don't notice them anymore. And similarly, the reverse Nordic curl, which is like the Nordic curl that I was recently shamed for by Greg Knuckles for not being strong enough to actually do them. The reverse Nordic curl is basically the opposite movement, where you're extending your hips and then just leaning back, going into full knee flexion. And I don't think I've ever seen anyone do this movement in the gym. Like in my whole lifting career, I've seen people do the hero pose, like the stretch, where you just essentially at the bottom and stretching, but I've never actually seen anyone do them as part of their routine. And this involves some theory crafting, because we have one study on this exercise, and it's a study published in the infamous journal minervamedica.at. Like, it doesn't get much worse than this, in my opinion. But anyways, there is one study on the exercise finding that it caused muscle growth in the quads, which is great, in the rectus femoris specifically. So it does involve some speculation, because we don't have a comparison of it to a leg extension. But like, I don't know. I think it's a good exercise because it lengthens the rectus femoris more and the quadriceps more. And so even though I don't see anyone do it, and it's unorthodox, I personally think it's probably one of the better or best quad exercises out there. That is my hunch, based on the evidence. Until we have studies directly comparing it, we can't make any super strong claims, but I do think it's underrated, and it's certainly unorthodox in the sense that you look silly doing it, and no one ever does it.
What you got, Pack?
Honestly, I nothing. I don't know. Front squats, zombie squats as a warm up for front squats. The most unorthodox movement I've done. Honestly, pendlay rows. I don't have much. I'm a big overhead press fan, and I've been doing that more and more recently. But barbell overhead press, I guess. But I have nothing here.
Wild,
unorthodox,
yeah. Groundbreaking.
No, that's fair. Yeah.
Honestly, I've never tried. Like, I've tried stuff, I guess, but I've never committed to like sissy squats, Nordic curls, Zercher squats, anything that you'd be like, oh, okay, only a few people try these exercises. I guess. Sorry, I've done the prowler with Grizzly once. Then it's not really a prowler. It's like a handmade, custom, super friction prone, not device construction. But yeah, I lose again.
One I wanted to add actually real quick. I have done behind the back deadlifts before for like at least a few weeks or a few months. And they're nice. Like if they were actually good for hypertrophy, like particularly good, I would probably do them more often, but they're just okay. Like, they're hard at the bottom, which is great for the quads, for quad hypertrophy, but you don't actually get that deep of a stretch in the quads to begin with. So, yeah, I guess I'd have to say that as well.
I think that's solid.
How about you?
For me, probably the most, I have two. One is I used to do, and honestly should get back to doing more, like windmills. So like kettlebell windmills, dumbbell windmills. When I was really pushing them, I was doing barbell windmills. And that at a certain point just got kind of silly. But yeah, I've done a lot of windmills. If for people listening that don't know what that is, you kind of take like a sumo-ish stance. You have a weight overhead in one arm, and you go down and touch the ground with your opposite hand. So yeah, like if you have the weight in your right hand, that stays extended overhead, and you rotate and hinge and touch your left hand to the ground, and then come back up. And that's a windmill. And the reason I did them is I have like a lingering QL issue, which also kind of like dovetails with like a disc issue. And yeah, just lower the to the sides of my spine on my lower back, like particularly QL, is like pretty janky. And has been for me for quite a while. And windmills both stretch and train that area pretty well. So whenever I'm consistently doing windmills, my back consistently feels better. And so yeah, these days when I do them, it is just kind of like 50, 60 pounds, just get some reps in, maintenance work. But when I first kind of discovered them and discovered that they did tend to make my back feel better, I pushed them pretty hard and got up to a 185 windmill on both sides, which I was pretty proud of. Which that may sound like a lot, but that used to be a lift that like people did. Like back in the pre-powerlifting days when it was just kind of like circus performers doing the odd lifts. I don't know what the heaviest windmill anyone has ever done is, but like the bent press used to be a contested thing, which is essentially bottom of the windmill. But so, okay, you're basically hinged down, rotated to one side, and you have the weight at your shoulder. And from that position, like from a bottom of the windmill position, you press the weight and then stand up. So it's essentially like a unilateral press combined with like a concentric only windmill. So I can't think of a reason you'd be able to bent press something but not windmill it. But I think, man, I used to know this off the top of my head. Yeah, so Arthur Saxon allegedly performed a 370-pound bent press, or 168 kilo. The reason I say allegedly is like, people were traveling performers in that era. Who really knows exactly how much weight it was? But I think like in order to just get your career off the ground as a traveling strongman back then, you kind of needed to be able to like comfortably do 225. Like 100 kilos legit was sort of the barrier to entry. So 185, I think to some people may sound like a lot. It's actually not all that much, but I was proud of it when I did it. So yeah, a lot of windmills. That's a weird one. The other thing that I used to do a lot of was plyometric push-ups. So basically I would stack up bumper plates and go down, like start arms extended on the plates, drop down to one side and try to, do it plyometric style, like, as little ground contact as possible, push myself back up, drop to the other side, do it. And usually just like 2 or 3 reps on each side. So, low rep plyometric stuff. And just build up the height that I could tolerate for plyometric push-ups. And the reason I did those was it was twofold. One, I started doing them when I was training for sports rather than powerlifting. And so basketball and football were my sports. Basketball, I was like, probably wouldn't hurt for being able to really whip a chest pass across the court. I have kind of short arms, so less space to generate velocity. And I was a point guard, so I was like, probably would help my passing velocity. Not the worst thing in the world. And also I played tight end in football, so needed to be able to block well, and figured really, really being able to just, hit someone in the shoulder pads really fucking fast, probably not a bad idea either. So that's why I started doing them. And then when I transitioned into powerlifting, I kept doing them for quite a while because that was like big time West Side era. And if you've read the Louis Simmons literature, he was really big on, there are 3 ways to maximize motor unit recruitment. You have the maximum effort method, the dynamic effort method, and the repetition method. And so yeah, I like a lot of dynamic effort stuff was like pretty big at the time. And so I was like, hey, what's better for moving fast than trying to do the most explosive plyometric push-ups that one can? So I kept doing them for probably the first 2.5 years that I was powerlifting as well. I don't think they actually ended up helping my bench press that much, but they were fun. So whatever.
I think you got us beat, to be honest. I think that is the bench press specifically. I mean, my dumbbell overhead press, the single arm thing, did end up looking like a bench press much of the time. Mm-hmm. But I think you got us beat on that. I thought when you said windmills for a second, I thought the calisthenics exercise where you're hanging off a bar and doing like a wiper essentially, that one. And I was like, and then you mentioned
windshield wipers.
Yeah, those ones. Initially, I was like, okay, dumbbell, kettlebell, I can kind of see it. And they said barbell, and I was like, this sounds like one of those IG gym fail videos, or like when they purposely try and use as much equipment as possible to make the exercise as awkward as possible.
No.
But hey, then I googled it, and it makes a lot more sense.
Nah, just like an old-timey strongman type of thing.
Fair enough.
Nice.
Okay. Next question.
Oh,
Yep.
yeah,
I think
sure.
so.
Okay. Riverworm asks, what kind of realistic mechanical or genetic augmentations can a person get now or in the near future that could help them lift heavier? Surgical, exoskeleton, whatever.
I have no idea. Greg, you better have something for this, and I know you will, because you are the purveyor of fun facts that we did not yet know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got some stuff.
Let's
Hit us.
go.
Genetic augmentations, I think, are still quite a ways off. And there are reasons for that. Gene therapies now are I mean, yeah, in theory, like if you could do a gene therapy that could change your genetics for the purpose of building muscle, you could also do gene therapies that could like essentially cure any just like purely genetic, like single nucleotide polymorphism type disease now. So like Huntington's wouldn't exist anymore. Like sickle cell would be a thing of the past. The reason that's not the case is like your germ lines, like your stem cell pools just kind of are what they are. And so like gene therapies can sort of like short-term affect like gene expression, gene transcription, and like current mature cells, but they don't like long-term change your genetics in a way that like, would like chronically cause big phenotypic differences. So yeah, like I think if we ever reached the point of like a Gattaca future where you could like edit the DNA of like embryos, then you could like, robustly affect someone's genes and probably have pretty big impacts. And I sort of think for that, like the tech is kind of there already, but there are just like extremely understandable ethical issues regarding like gene editing and cloning in humans. So that's not really being pursued. And that's not for you, but like for your kids, if there was like a mad scientist who was willing to risk it all and, both of you probably go to jail forever, I think that's like theoretically a thing for offspring already at this point in the world. But yeah, for the most part, genetic augmentations basically off the table. The rest of the stuff, like surgical stuff, exoskeletons, that like progress is being made on that. I don't think that there are any like mass produced ones that are really cooking yet, but there are like several American companies and like several Chinese companies, and I'm sure other places as well. But I think the US and China are kind of the two leaders on this front. Just like companies producing prototypes of exoskeletons that can help dramatically with lifting. Most of that research that to this point is more slanted towards like just sort of like day-to-day work usage. So if your job would require you to lift 50-pound sacks of something or like 50-pound boxes, make it such that it requires 10 pounds of effort from the individual, with the exoskeleton taking much more of the load. But yeah, like if like once that gets working pretty well, I think it would just be a difference of degree rather than a difference in kind to kind of tune that for being able to help you lift superhuman amounts. So I don't think there's anything like production ready, but I think if you had enough money, the people working on prototypes for like industrial uses, you could probably say, hey, here's $5 million, make me something to help me lift 1,000 pounds. Like I suspect with the right funding and like shove in the right direction, that's probably already feasible. Surgical stuff, this is like getting more into the realm of like theory and hearsay. But like, and I don't know, like it's one of those things where like I don't want to attach anyone's name to it or whatnot. But in terms of what there are whispers about is allegedly, in particular sports, one of the better things that can happen to you is a full tendon rupture of a relevant muscle for performance. Because, if you think of your muscles and bones as like a lever system, like when people talk about having good insertions for strength, what they're talking about is having muscles that attach farther from the joints that they create rotational torque about. So, if you have two people that have the same size biceps, their biceps can contract with the same amount of linear force, and one of them, for one of the individuals, the bicep inserts twice as far from the axis of rotation of the elbow than for the other person. The person who has the bicep that inserts twice as far from the elbow will be able to curl twice as much weight because the same linear contractile force creates twice as large of a joint moment. And so, again, I don't know if this is true or not, but in terms of what there are whispers about, I have heard people say that in some of the countries that take like Paralympic bench press really seriously, athletes kind of look forward to pec ruptures because then they can get their pec inserted further down their humerus, and once they're rehabbed, they bench more. Another thing that there are whispers about that I don't know how true it is that when baseball pitchers get like a UCL injury and have to get Tommy John surgery, that there's like a way that the Tommy John surgery can be performed such that you get like a little more torque once you're rehabbed. Like, it's not terribly uncommon for people to come back from Tommy John surgery throwing a little bit harder than they did before. So, that's not really like that exotic, I guess. Like, it's just kind of like an application of basic physics and finding a surgeon that is willing to reattach a tendon like 2 centimeters further than like where it was attached before. But I think that's theoretically something that's on the table. But I don't know. I don't know what like the long-term prognosis of that is. Like, will you be more prone to like re-injury or like rupturing it again? I don't know. Certainly not recommending that. But yeah, those are the things that like immediately come to mind that are either potentially here, or kind of around the corner.
Is Stronger by Science releasing something? Was there a hint there? The SBS exoskeleton, Greek word. You're welcome.
No, no.
Saved it there with that no. Well, no, hypothetically there is one coming, I want dibs on the first order.
You can have at it. That's I'm claustrophobic, so the idea of like being in an exoskeleton freaks me the fuck out. Like wearing long sleeves, I don't like it. Like weird sensory issues. Yeah, shorts and t-shirt, baby. Like it's comfortable, but also I don't like having too much stuff wrapped around me. So yeah, I'm extremely disinterested in exoskeletons.
We'll get you a mink. What's it called?
Mink coat?
Not coat. What's the other word? I just added fur, like a fur to wear. Yeah, that'd look cool. Anyways, sorry to distract and detract from everything that you just said. Super interesting, though. It would be cool to see in the future, mostly in the context of people who actually need like an exoskeleton. It would be interesting to see if it becomes a reality that we get to properly experience versus more like a proof of concept sort of reality.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the reasons that it's not being pursued like more vigorously is just that like there's so much progress that has been made with regards to like industrial robots that it's like why give robotic augmentations to people when maybe just a robot would be better at whatever thing. I think exoskeletons are also being researched and pursued for like military applications as well. I think that's where a lot of the current funding is coming from, but yeah, I don't know.
Nice.
Okay, next question.
Let's hit it.
All right, Roaring Shark asks, can you point to research showing that training on consecutive days for the same muscle groups is detrimental? I've always heard that you need to wait 48 hours to recover before training again. It makes sense intuitively, but I don't know the actual science behind it.
Yeah, so I'll quickly touch on it, see if you two have anything to add. To my knowledge, there are 2 studies looking at the idea of spacing out training days across the week more versus training on consecutive days. And to my knowledge, both of these are in untrained populations, so take the results with somewhat of a grain of salt. But from what I recall, both of them have found similar hypertrophy and similar strength gains. So, personally, when it comes to distribution of training across the week, I view it quite similarly to protein distribution, where it's the sort of thing that theoretically matters, and theoretically matters a fair amount, but practically doesn't seem to matter all that much. And certainly the 2 studies we have haven't picked up on any large effect of, oh, if you train on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then take the rest of the week off, versus you train on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, there's a huge difference in terms of results. That hasn't panned out to be the case. And so in terms of importance, I think that you'd almost certainly be better off training 3 days a week, back to back, for example, versus saying, I'm not going to train 3 days a week back to back, I'm just going to train 1 day a week instead. Like, the total dosage of training, volume, relative intensity potentially, is likely quite a bit more important than exactly how you structure it. And that is what the 2 empirical studies I mentioned earlier have found. Practically, if I can avoid it, I will try to avoid training on consecutive days, or essentially just space out training for the same muscle group by as long as possible. So, disclosure, the way I write programs as a coach is I essentially create a table where I have the days of the week mapped out on top, and then I have the muscle groups or the movement patterns I want to train mapped out on the side. And then essentially, I just try and make sure that training a given muscle group or a given movement is as spaced out as possible between each instance, and that each session looks reasonable as far as how many exercises are within that session, and so forth and so forth. So while as a coach, and practically, I try and space it out, from the empirical side of things, it doesn't seem like you're missing out on much if you do have to train on consecutive days. That is my take, but very open to Greg and or Pack full-on fact-checking me.
Yeah, I'm of the same opinion. So I'm curious to see what Mr. Greg has to say.
I agree. The one small fact check I would give is there are 3 studies on the topic, not 2. And one of them did use recreationally trained subjects. So not people who are like super well trained, but people with some prior training experience. But yeah, I think this is, in my mind, one of the classic topics for like an empirical versus like rationalistic approach to making confident statements about program design, because you will frequently see people say that like, oh, hey, like let's concoct this argument, like you train, you cause some degree of muscle damage, the muscles need to recover. If you train them again, they're still recovering. You won't be able to direct muscle protein synthesis toward actually building muscle if you train them again before they're recovered, because those resources are going to continue going to recovery. And before you've recovered, your performance is going to be negatively impacted. So you're not going to be able to put as much mechanical tension on the muscles, and due to like fatigue mechanisms inherently like independent of performance, you're not going to be able to like fully activate and like reach peak tension for all of your muscle fibers. Therefore, you have to let muscles recover, or like the next session will be suboptimal or potentially counterproductive. Like it's not going to stimulate as much hypertrophy as a session would if you spaced it out a bit more. Like that sounds like a compelling argument, but the only problem with it is every time it's been studied to this point, it hasn't panned out. And I think the fact that 2 of the 3 studies are in untrained lifters and the other one is in recreationally trained lifters, if anything, like further kind of bolsters the point that you probably don't need to let the muscles fully recover first, because, repeated bout effect kicks in. Like, trained lifters experience less muscle damage and less long-lasting fatigue after a session than untrained lifters do. And so, if anything, you would expect training on consecutive days to be even more deleterious for untrained lifters than trained lifters. At least I would think. And so, yeah, like to this point, it doesn't appear that it really matters. Like, if you're going to do 2 sessions, whether you do them on back-to-back days for the same muscle or space them out more, the data we have to this point suggests that you'll probably wind up in about the same place. I do think that there are, like a limitation of research is that you're trying to equate everything. So practically in the real world, you might be able to like handle higher volumes or just want to train harder if your muscles are fully recovered. And so like practically you wouldn't be equating number of sets done and like intensity and whatnot. Like if you spaced it out more, you would actually wind up training harder and with higher volumes and grow more muscle because of that. But just purely on a basis of, hey, if we equate how many sets are done and the endpoints of the sets and whatnot, do you actually gain more muscle and wind up better off if you space sessions out more? To this point, the evidence suggests no. Like it's, if you wanted to train on back-to-back days, like the same muscle group versus spacing it out more, doesn't seem if you look at the evidence through an empirical lens, the empirical evidence doesn't suggest that it makes that big of a difference, if any difference at all. So yeah, I mean, my kind of like practical recommendation is if your schedule allows you to recover, yeah, do it. Like, unless you're a masochist, like it's probably feels better to train a muscle when it's recovered and feeling fresh than like continuing to hammer it when you're still sore and like experiencing DOMs. And I do think you will be able to train a little bit harder, but on the flip side, if your weekly schedule kind of dictates that you're going to have to train a muscle on back-to-back days and you're like, oh man, will it be better to only train it once versus, double the volume, but end up having to train on back-to-back days? I think, yeah, if that's the consideration, yeah, training on back-to-back days is fine. Like it's not that deleterious if your muscles don't have time to recover.
Nice.
Okay.
I was pretty sure that that's what the evidence was, but I was like, are we missing something? Because that's one of those claims that people are notorious in certain environments for still saying, don't train the same muscle to every day.
It sounds obvious.
Yeah,
like, and the rationalistic case, like the argumentation you can make, that would have been a good topic for this episode. Because like for the debate section, because yeah, I think you can marshal a strong argument in favor of it, but the problem is it's not supported by the evidence.
When people vote that this was the best episode ever in the history of the podcast, then we'll have plenty of opportunities to debate many other topics.
Yeah, I think this would be one to revisit maybe in like a few months when people have forgotten this conversation we're having right now. Okay. Next question. What's the best exercise in existence and why is it seated Zercher shrugs from blocks? I think this might be for Grizzly and by proxy pack.
Yes.
I suspect.
It is Zercher shrugs from blocks because you're essentially getting every benefit of exercise ever. Setting up, especially if you do it the Grizzly way, where you literally have to carry 45 plates on 45 plates to just set up on the small blocks. I mean, you are getting a total of 20 to 30 minutes of just weighted walking, and you're picking up stuff off the ground, functional fitness through the roof. And then essentially you get to use everybody's plates from your local gym, thus making you more likable, because that's how it works. Like, there's nothing better in a commercial gym than a guy using all the 45s to do a few Zercher shrugs in the corner. You will automatically become a person, an authority figure, and somebody people look up to. And at the same time, there's many times in both sports and just life where you are seated and you have to pick up something with mostly your forearms and shrug it up, and that's it. Seated Zercher shrugs from blocks, best exercise ever. Cardio, strength, looks, dominance. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if you also get a big testosterone boost regardless of sex from Zercher shrugs.
I'm sold. All right,
Awesome.
Next question. Okay, so Cindy Browning asks, if you could remove one piece of false information from everyone's collective brains, what would it be, lifting or otherwise?
Yeah, so I'll take this one first. Again, not medical advice, but from like a consequentialist perspective and what is ultimately important. Like, whether or not most people think that bro splits are the way to gain muscle or not, they're not really being harmed that much, minus maybe seeing a bit less of a bicep peak, like getting a bit less hypertrophy. But I think I'm going to keep it to lifting, because otherwise my brain cannot comprehend how many different options there are to sort through. But when it comes to lifting, I think fear-mongering around certain exercises or positions is probably one. So beliefs around movement do likely impact how much pain you experience from lifting and how much discomfort and so forth. And so I think, for example, the fear-mongering around deadlifting or around some spinal flexion and that sort of stuff, from the outside at least, not being a physical therapist, does seem to be the one thing that very many people within the industry, especially beginners, are exposed to. Just that, hey, if you round your spine, you're going to blow out your back and you're going to slip a disc and hernia and all sorts of stuff. And I don't know, I kind of wish that wasn't so broadly communicated and thought. And I think that might just make the lifting industry a little bit better. But yeah, that is my take. I'm curious to hear what you have to say.
What you got, Pac?
So I would go down the route of removing the idea that you can confidently predict injury or fix imbalances or whatever faults with one's technique, and that will confidently lead to less of an injury risk, and or that we can fully control for injuries happening. Something along those lines. And that comes off a recent discussion I had where, I don't know, people have this, people want to feel as if we know everything with certainty and we can control everything with certainty. And when it comes to injury from lifting and pains and aches, I just would love to get in people's heads and remove the idea that, oh, if you're feeling some sort of pain or ache or have some slight injury, that's because you are doing something wrong, and it is not a logical consequence of you living and doing stuff repeatedly over and over again, especially in the context of resistance training. Something along those lines. It needs a bit more thinking in order to phrase it appropriately. But yeah, the world, like I often get clients that go, hey, I had this pain. I'm going to now go and get helped because I think it was that one exercise that did it. And it's like, I don't know how well how much I am behind that sort of thinking. So essentially make people movement optimists to a certain extent.
I think that's a good one.
You?
For myself, I think I was leaning in a similar direction, but like, and this might be a bit of a cop out, but slightly more meta yet. Where I think people have a lot of incorrect ideas about how to evaluate evidence and argumentation. Primarily, I think people are way too confident about way too much. I think that there's great power and great epistemic honesty in a way that's very freeing to just be able to say, I don't know, or to say, this is a thing I think, and I have very little confidence in it because I haven't looked for the evidence, or I have looked at the evidence and the evidence is weak, but this is what I think, but I don't believe it that strongly. And if I'm wrong, it's okay. I think that there are precious few things that we can be like super confident about. And a lot of stuff, there should be just varying shades of doubt, and oftentimes way more doubt than people actually have. I think, I think a lot of people go through life being way too confident about way too much because they find arguments compelling that they shouldn't, that have like key weaknesses, or they think that evidence is strong when it's actually quite weak or sometimes non-existent. And I think that, I don't know. I think just being less confident in shit. And if you haven't had like the time or don't have the ability to like really dive into the like research on something for yourself to like generate a strong take, just don't have one. Like it's fine to not know. It's fine to have beliefs but not be that confident in them. And I think that's a nice way to go through life. I think having too many strong beliefs that are built on a foundation of sand is a scary way to go through the world, you know? Because like there's a lot of stuff you're believing strongly that like I think you feel on some level like it might be a little threatened, because I think you might intuit on some level that maybe I believe this a lot, but like not for the best reasons. I think just being able to let go of that, just to be like, yeah, I think some shit might be wrong. Who cares? Whatever. Just roll with it. I think that's just a much better way to go through life.
100% agree.
Okay. Let's see. I think you guys want me to tackle the next one. So can one of you read me in?
Sure. So this is by TK Julo, something like that, on Facebook. Is there any research around the effects of HRT, hormone replacement therapy, on trans women athletes? Does a trans woman taking spironolactone, hormone blockers, and estrogen see a drop-off in gains and the loss of gains? Would trans men on testosterone have to stop hormone therapy to compete, or could they compete in natty competitions since all they're doing is adding a normal amount of testosterone to their systems? I am in the LGBTQ community and on the gender interesting spectrum myself, so I wonder about what the effects of such a normal part of our community members' lives would be on them should they want to get into powerlifting or bodybuilding.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, this is this is a topic with like some general evidence and quite a bit less like hyper specific evidence. Like there have been a handful of studies looking at like body comp changes in trans men and women that go on hormone therapy. And there have been a much smaller handful of studies that have looked at some performance changes when people go on hormone therapy, whether that be exogenous androgens or suppressing endogenous androgens and taking estradiol. Like there's a little bit, but not much. But overall, the evidence tends to suggest that the hormones do what you would expect them to do. If you if you take someone with a Y chromosome and knock testosterone levels down to essentially zero, in a vacuum, that tends to lead to a loss of muscle mass. And in a vacuum, even without estrogen, like it tends to cause some fat gain as well. Add estrogen into the mix, that, if anything, would tend to cause more fat gain. But you take someone with a Y chromosome and make their hormones more similar to those of a biological female, and you tend to get physiology closer to that of a biological female, and vice versa. You put exogenous androgens in someone without a Y chromosome, and they wind up with physiology much closer to that of a biological male, and that's what you tend to see in terms of like individual studies. Like how much does performance change? It's going to depend on what aspect of performance you're looking at, and also, if you take people who are relatively untrained and expose them to a type of training that would tend to cause gains, but they're starting like androgen deprivation therapy, like they're going on spironolactone, maybe you don't see performance change, but with like endogenous testosterone production, you would expect it to increase. So that's still kind of like on net a decrease, if that makes sense. But yeah, like overall, the hormones do what you would expect them to do. Like you take higher testosterone levels, knock them down to zero, tends to cause a loss in muscle mass, loss in strength, increase in fat gain. You take very low testosterone levels, add some exogenous testosterone in the mix, and hypertrophy, gains in performance, loss in body fat, like that's what you tend to see. So yeah, that goes about the way one would expect. The reason I'm not talking in like really kind of like strictly quantified terms is just there's not a ton of research to this point. Again, there's more just kind of like general body comp changes in the general population that have been looked at versus like actual performance and body comp and like hypertrophy changes in athletes. Like there's way, way less on that. And so, yeah, to make like confident statements about like time courses on which adaptations occur, or the extent to which physiology becomes like normalized between trans and cis women or trans and cis men over time with like years of hormone therapy. I think we just need to wait for more evidence to make like really confident statements on that front. But yeah, I mean, overall, like I said, the hormones tend to do what you would expect them to do. The next question, would trans men on testosterone have to stop hormone therapy to compete? Typically, yes. And the same is also true for some sports for trans women on spironolactone. But I mean, that's typically just going to depend on the regulations of the body that sanctions whatever sport you want to compete in. Like different sporting organizations have different rules and regulations. Like in a lot of drug tested sports, any amount of exogenous testosterone, even if it's for like gender confirmation therapy, is off limits, just because, yeah, it's off limits. Like it's steroids. Steroids tend to be banned in sports. The same general thing tends to apply to cis men in sports who have like hypoandrogenism for whatever reason. Like if you're a guy with low testosterone, you might say, hey, it would be fair for me to be able to take some TRT to get my testosterone levels back to that of the people I'm competing against. But most of the time it's not allowed. Like even if a doctor directs it, you can't get a therapeutic use exemption for it. So yeah, like in a lot of sports, a lot of organizations, that would be a no-go. For other sports and other organizations, they might make exceptions for it. You would just need to look at the rules of like the drug testing of the sanctioning body for whatever sport you compete in, unless you compete untested. And in untested, all bets are off. And so I also called out trans women and spironolactone. That is also like a no-go in some sports, which like kind of functionally serves as a ban on trans women in those sports. And I think this is like a little less common, but like when that is against the rules, like when like you would also get popped, like when it would also be counted as a substance violation for finding spironolactone in the system. The reason for that is it is a drug that can be used to hide evidence of doping. Like if if someone just wanted to like really blast high doses of testosterone and then try to get that shit way down again before they're about to get drug tested, they might want to use spironolactone in order to do that, to kind of like cover up evidence of doping. So that's like the reason given when that is like counted as a positive test, even for trans women who want to compete. But like I said, that tends to function as just like a soft ban on trans women being able to compete in those sports. So yeah, long story short, the drugs that one would take for like gender confirmation purposes, whether or not it's allowed or not is going to depend on the sports and regulations of the sporting body under which you plan to compete. But it just varies. Like there's no kind of one size fits all.
Nice. Plenty of questions and even plenty of answers.
So yeah, I think this was a good episode. I had fun with it. What do you guys think? Did you guys enjoy the debates, the battle royale?
Yeah, I think it was really good. I think it's here to stay. And I think specifically for future episodes, we'll make the prompts slightly more neutral almost, as opposed to definitive statements. And then I think we're on to a winner. But ultimately, I think we need to hear from the listeners as well.
Absolutely. I would also just like to say before we wrap up, I was going to say this off air, but I'll say it on air. Take public accountability. Pac, I'm slightly concerned that I may have been like a little bit too aggressive towards you at some points during the debate. I don't know if you felt that or not. But when I get into like competitive mode, I think I tend to like be a little meaner, like talk a little bit of shit. So nothing was intended with ill will behind it. So yeah.
Not at all. There was no point where I felt any type of way. I was also shaking my head now. For the audience that was just listening, no, it didn't feel like that whatsoever.
Okay, cool. Just making sure.
I appreciate you.
All right. Well, I think that wraps up another episode of the Stronger by Science podcast. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Let us know if you enjoyed the Battle Royale style episodes in the Facebook group, subreddit, or if you're watching/listening on YouTube, in the YouTube comments. And we will talk to you again in a couple weeks.
Peace.
Peace.